Hello, my name is Dean Frias. I am presenting my applied assignment today on inclusivity in informal learning spaces, specifically focusing on museums. For anybody with visual disabilities, I'll do my best to kind of give a little description of each slide. Myself, I am presenting with a short brown hair, some facial hair, a necklace, and a brown polo shirt. So advancing to the next slide, which kind of looks like an open journal, is the table of contents. We will be, in this presentation, we'll be looking at my pre-work, evidence and research, new learnings, and continued inquiry. Moving on to the next slide, we have a introduction slide to the pre-work. For pre-work, again, my topic is focusing on museums and other informal learning spaces, their inclusivity, and how welcoming are they of people with disabilities. The reason why I've focused on this topic in particular is because I am a museum educator professional. I've been working in the field for about 10 years now. It honestly, I'm really interested because museums are a public space that should be accessible to all. So how do museums ensure that they're building this inclusive environment and in making sure that everybody does feel welcome to learn? Some of the aspects of inclusion that we'll be looking at through this presentation are the accessibility of the exhibits themselves, staff training, and also how is universal design learning applied within these institutions. On the right-hand side of the screen are three photos. The photo on the top is of a lady with a blue shirt and her guide dog interacting with one of the museum exhibits. On the bottom left is a photo of two young learners, one in a purple sweater and one in a floral white sweater, and they're kind of playing with bubbles. And on the right hand side of the screen, lower right, is a photo that appears to depict a father and a daughter. Father's wearing an orange sweater, daughter's wearing a pink sweater, and they're playing with an exhibit on the museum floor that has to do with magnets and some black liquid. So moving forward, I took this opportunity to interview my colleague and friend Bethany Lang, who is a human systems engineer. She specializes in user experiences within museums, and she's been applying what she's been working in the field for about 4 years. She does have her master's in human systems engineering, which she does specialize, or she specialized while she was in school on people with audio and visual disabilities, and how do they get through the museum, and also what is their perspective of what they can take away. On the right hand side of the screen are two photos. The photo on the top is a person in a blue sweater with their hand on a museum exhibit that has the AD audio description logo on it, which indicates that this can be read for people with visual disabilities. And on the bottom is a professional headshot of Bethany Lang, who is presenting with long blonde hair, glasses, a necklace, and a black button-up blouse. So the course materials that I looked at to inform this assignment were the CAS Universal Design Learning Guidelines. At that point in the course, it was really interesting to learn about universal design and how it's applied in many different aspects. Specifically looking to how do we compare educational offerings and not really give it a second thought of what parts of it is actually accessible. And I think this happens a lot in museums, specifically when building these exhibits, and also looking at diversity. The other course material was diversity at work, the practice of inclusion. This particularly highlights employers employing people with disabilities, both why some employees are hesitant, but also why is it ultimately an amazing and fantastic opportunity to incorporate those people onto an employment team, which we'll get a bit more into this presentation of why those perspectives are so critical at improving inclusivity and accessibility. For my own research, I identified quite a bit, but specifically for this assignment, we'll focus on two resources. The NISE Network, DEI booklet. The NISE stands for National Informal STEM Educators Network. DEI booklet, DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Essentially, this booklet is a collection of best practices of how museums can incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion within their institutions, and what are ways that they can help kind of further along that progress and ensuring many different perspectives, voices are at the table, and how to improve accessibility of museum floor exhibitions. And the other resource I identified was a book called Museum Education for Today's Audiences. It's essentially a collection of various stories of different museums across the country and how they were able to embrace and put into practice human-centered design and human-centered perspectives to help enhance various aspects of inclusivity of their museum. In the booklet, the two articles that I used mostly kind of looked at people with autism and how friendly of these spaces are, and best practices of how to help train museum staff to interact with people with various levels of autism. And the other one was a disability, physical disability, of how to incorporate spaces, museum exhibits, to be more accessible. So the evidence, this slide shows a screenshot of an email that I had with Bethany Lang, just kind of setting up our meeting. And during that interview I had with Bethany Lang, I focused on four very big questions. How does your background in human systems engineering help assess universal design and inclusion of people with disabilities? What are some simple, easy wins museums could start implementing to help be more inclusive? What areas do you feel museums excel in accessibility and inclusion? And finally, where do you feel that museums could be more inclusive? All of these questions were really critical to understanding really easy perspectives and wins for museums to start practicing to help better inclusion of people with disabilities. Something as simple as having an audit walk through the museum from different perspectives immediately identifies things that are maybe out of reach, or maybe things that people that have fine motor skill problems aren't able to interact with. People who have visual disabilities might not be able to take away the same perspectives. So these questions really helped build out kind of like a task list that could be really easily applied in different institutional settings. This next slide that we're moving on, titled New Learning. On the left, we have an image of the father and daughter playing with the magnets on the museum floor. Some new, I guess, learning I took away from this assignment, but the overall course in general was that inclusion and education helps reduce stereotypes and comfortability of employees and employers of first hiring people with disabilities, but also improves their confidence of knowing how to interact with people with disabilities, and also eliminates the stigma, or helps eliminates that stigma. The other points that were very interesting I took away were more employees with disabilities can lead to more inclusive environments, and more diverse perspectives increase overall inclusion practices. All of this is to say that having more people, again, at the table, different views and perspectives on your employment team there at the museum, or even having a way to provide feedback, helps make people feel that they are included and that their voice matters. And it was really interesting to see that although these are practices we've been saying for a while, that there's actual statistical data that helps support that better education and training really does lead to a very different work environment, and also a learning environment for people who are visiting. Equity, it's some of the same things we took away here. How these spaces are are showing equitability, or showing that they are equitable, changes depending on the museum itself and its audiences. Uh, Looking at, again, training and awareness highlights areas of inequity, also highlights areas of maybe where their voice is not present at the table. And the other thing is looking at feedback and collaborative collaborations with museums and groups that specialize in disability advocacy. Um, this type of partnership really shows that the museums are dedicated to equity and inclusion of people with disabilities. And it was great to see that the course reflects that this does show big changes in the field, that you really can change a lot just by having something as simple as a conversation with a group that advocates for disability inclusion. And finally, one major thing that I took away was access. From the category of access was that universal design really helps improve access through considering various perspectives. There was a part somewhere in this course that I had tried to find it, but I don't remember where it was. But essentially had said that universal design and accessibility helps everyone, not just a particular individual with a disability. At some point, we all have a type of disability, or we live on a spectrum of disabilities. And that really hit home to me, because looking at something like the automatic door opening that help people, with wheelchairs to go through doors, is not just going to help them, but it may also help an employee who's wheeling, a ton of heavy boxes, so they need to get through the door, or maybe ensuring areas are accessible for people who have, chronic, let's say, like bladder problems. That may also help someone who is pregnant, even though a pregnancy is temporary. That just helps better include, help that person's experience, and makes them feel as though that they are welcome in this space. So this final section called continued inquiry, uh, I'm kind of interested in wanting to know more of what are the various different ways that museums approach inclusivity and access for people with disabilities. I would like to see, is it possible to develop a main guide that focused specifically on people with disabilities, and some best practices that could be applied across the whole museum field across the United States. The way I would approach this is of learning best training practices by attending conferences, by talking to peers in the field, and also talking to advocates of disability inclusion practices, and seeing what areas that they would highlight are exceptional in the field of museum inclusion. A question that I would have for my peers is, how does accessible and welcoming, or rather, how accessible and welcoming are museums in the city that you live in? Perhaps you haven't visited a museum in a while. Maybe try visiting one that interests you, and then going through it twice, and first one, kind of what you first take away with your immediate experiences, and then second, go through it maybe through the mindset of somebody who has a disability, and how would that completely change your perspective between those two experiences. And I'm honestly really curious to see if it would change it very drastically. Thank you so much for sitting through this presentation, and this final slide lists all the references I used to help build out this assignment. Thank you so much.